Hi, everybody, and welcome to a very big moment in my life. Is to reintroduce myself to John Cummings and, of course, his co-author, Stefani Koorey. Another book. It's called Murder, Manslaughter, and Mayhem of the South Coast. How do you describe the South Coast, John? I mean, what does the South Coast encompass?
Well, the towns of we started really in Dighton, Berkeley, worked our way down into Fall River, Somerset, Swansea. We went right to Bedford, Mattapoisett,
Yeah.
Fairhaven. We went right down into Little Compton and Tiverton, Rhode Island, for the purposes of this book.
Sure.
I mean, the definition would be the south coast of Massachusetts would not have included Tiverton and Little Compton, but for this book it includes Tiverton.
Okay. All right. And what was the number that you gave that was Fall River and the rest by murder, accidents, murders?
You're losing me the number when you say.
Meaning number of people were killed, murdered.
Oh, there was, in this particular volume, which is volume 1 of 2 or 3 volumes, we're not sure yet. In this particular volume, there were 75 murders, 68 murders, 75 victims.
Okay.
From 1832 to 1969. And some of the...
That was the whole South Coast?
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of them were solved and some of them were unsolved. Like the very first one, the Maria Cornell thing, had to go unsolved because he was never convicted.
Yep.
And the very last one in 1969, which was Russell Goldstein.
Yep.
Who you probably knew him, Tom.
We did.
I knew
Yeah,
him.
I did. I know.
His murder was unsolved, so it's still unsolved. So
Russell had a lot of octopus ties to a lot of different people,
Yeah.
and that's why it was very difficult.
That's a good way to put it, octopus.
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
that because it really is.
He was.
That.
He
It
was.
really
He
that.
was a businessman, user. He was involved in selling gun, taking stolen goods. The gangs that Sergeant Paul Gonzalez did was cashing in on that through that process, and people would know that.
And prostitution. And...
Well, I didn't get. He said he liked ladies of the night.
yes.
Right.
I thought that maybe that was just sort of part of the business, but he obviously does like prostitution.
No,
So I like the octopus. I like that.
he did like prostitutes, and they used to come visit him at night.
I got it.
In his, in his apartment above the. So that was one of the reasons why they couldn't solve the case, because there was no forced entry into his apartment.
Yep.
It must have been a knock on the door, and he opened the door, and somebody blew him away.
2 different caliber guns used.
Yeah,
That's
weird.
an interesting. That's like paying you back for the type of guns that you use. It had to be somebody affiliated with the gun part of it.
2 people.
Well, it could be 2 people. Yes.
Yeah, a hit.
Yeah. Now, both of you collaborated. Is that the word?
Yes.
Collaborated on this book, which is fascinating, by the way.
Thank you.
It was John's idea. John came up with this brilliant idea to do this book, and it was something that popped in, and I was like, I need to be involved in that. Can I please? Because
Well, he's written some great books. He's written some great books. You have some great books here. But let me go back to your statement you originally. You say this could be a 3-part series.
Well, it certainly will be 2-part, because the era that had the most murders was the 1990s.
Yeah.
And we haven't touched on the 1990s yet. So
No.
the 70s, 80s, 90s, and to the current time. It'll depend on how many we have to whether it'll be volume 2 or whether it'll go into volume 3.
Another fascinating part of it, what people would remember, is McCarthy. McCarthy, that was found guilty of killing his niece. In time, this is in the 90s. 90, maybe late in the 90s.
I think you need to be a resource for the second volume.
Yeah.
I'm serious. We need to pick your brain.
Yeah, well, I can think of it. McCarthy comes across to me as someone who was familiar. The name was familiar, and so then I read them all actually, and as you pointed out so very capably, is that what was the climate of economic jobs growth here at different eras in time. I think you said 1 million spindles in the garment trade, and then you went down to 50 million or 50,000. It wasn't because of how adequate it is to point out that the spinsters, that was important for the growth.
Oh, yeah.
And then the flight of the immigrants, by virtue not just the Portuguese, the Canadians coming down, the Irish, the whole that. This was a melting pot of all nationalities, all because the draw was here for the jobs.
And then the
That's right.
dispersing of the people from the urban centers to the rural communities, and then the crime rises there
Oh, yeah.
and moves away from the
Oh,
cities.
well, yeah, because
a little bit.
a little more hardened here than it would be in the suburbs, supposedly.
Well, when
they
you're
come
right
in-
on top of each other,
Yeah, yeah.
there's
Yeah.
6 apartments in a building, and you're right
Oh,
on
yeah.
top of each other, and it gets hot. I'm sure it gets hot emotionally as well as.
Well, look at the. You made the comparison, and you think about this. That Fall River was an equal to Manchester, England, in the development of clothing.
Oh, sure.
So I mean, you think about that, and then how that evaporated, and then you got the whaling was out of New Bedford that came back after the failing of the manufacturers. That slid down. But the crime one, it was different. Was
Yeah.
spread out. It was in different cases. It was husband and wife. It was wife cheating. A lot of insanity in the whole case.
Well, they were declared insane. I mean, we don't know, for sure. I mean, the court declared them insane. Were sent to different, insane asylums.
Yep.
And some died in the insane asylum. Some were absolved by the governors, and they were
Yep.
back on the streets.
Yep.
And
I was
so-
surprised that the other thing about it, Stefan, John, is that you brought out the law in certain cases, as Stephanie talked about before. Avery, Reverend Avery, couldn't testify in his own defense because he was being tried in Rhode Island.
Right.
That's because had to be the law.
That was the law then. But this was 1832, 1833. So
Yeah.
the trial was in 1833. So.
Now that was in the 18th century. And the other thing is, which is so aptly applied, is that in the case of Sarah Maria Cornell, and when she was hung, and when she was pregnant and so on. So it's a story that's interesting to read.
Yes.
She couldn't have done it based on how she was found. She was
No,
found
she couldn't
on
have done it herself.
She was
No.
on a stackpole
Right.
and we had to learn what a stackpole was. I mean, when was the last time you?
What is that?
It has to do with the way they pile up wheat,
Okay.
not wheat, straw.
Straw.
From when
So you
they-
have to have poles or it's just going to slide off. You can't
right.
get.
They create
Yeah.
either a cone
Yeah.
or a square, and
So that's where
it was
she-
a stackpole that was holding up this big pile of straw, and she was hanging from that. And they don't know how she got up there. There wasn't a ladder.
Well, that's like somewhere in the book, a person hung
Somebody-
himself, but he was handcuffed behind his back.
Right.
So obviously,
And it's also way before any kind of ability to determine, was she strangled before she was hung?
Yeah.
Was she placed there? They examined her, but it's very beginning of medical technology and.
well, because we wanted to tempt the readers. All right, we can't say that Sarah Marie Cornell was our favorite. By that I mean,
Well,
it was the most
Most
intriguing.
to me, it was the most intriguing
Story in the book, and tell us about it.
Well, I mean, she was a mill girl who came from Canada, worked in the textile industry, became pregnant with a baby, and left a note saying, when she disappeared, left a note saying, if I'm not found, check with Reverend Ephraim Avery, who ended up being her Methodist minister. Had run into her in a camp and then ran into her again somewhere else. And
He was married as well, so he was a married minister.
he had 2 or 3 kids, and he was tried and absolved, and then was tried by the Methodist Association and was absolved. And then he came back. He was a minister in Bristol, and he came back, and then he left to go to the Midwest. So it was
So
never-
this is really an unsolved crime.
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah.
And again, the question is, and she was hung at, and that the the property,
The Durfee
the
Farm.
Durfee Farm.
Durfee Farms was originally Rhode Island.
It was Tiverton, Rhode Island, but it's now South Park.
South
Right.
Park. So they had to exhume the body, put it in Oak Grove Cemetery.
Yeah.
And then you talk about how it was abused, the gravesite.
It was vandalized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
vandalized. Now,
There's some great illustrations in the book, Tom, of
Yeah.
her of that particular trial in Avery.
there was.
And,
Yeah, there was.
There's a book, one of the sources for the Sarah Cornell story is a book by Catherine Williams. And she wrote the book at that period of time. She was a female writer who wrote the book in the 1830s about the trial and about her. But she was paid to write the book by the Mill Owners Association. So she puts a different slant on
Slant
it
on it, yeah.
because she was paid to do a number on the story in order to absolve the working conditions of the mills in which she worked.
I got it.
So to paint it in a less harsh tone. So you always, when you look at sources, that you always have to be careful
What
to
you say?
understand their bias and where they're coming from.
Well, even with many of the things that are written in the book, you have to be careful with you have to have your research really up to date, and you have to make them co-conspirators as you write the book, that you quote them. Or if you don't do that, you're out there, in no man's land.
Well, I was doing
You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, the section in the Lizzie Borden one where I referenced my grandfather as an example, I heard these stories at the dinner table.
Yeah.
So for me, that was the research that I had done. I had done the research with my father talking about, he had been in the law firm with his father, who had been invited to participate in the represent Lizzie, and he chose not to because he thought she was guilty. And that's when my father would talk about, his father would say, Lizzie Borden was guilty as sin. Well, Stephanie and I debate this all the time.
Yeah.
Whether or not Lizzie was guilty or not is somewhat irrelevant. My source was
Yeah,
the
your
dining
family.
room table,
Yeah.
the family.
Of course.
So
That's-
if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't have put in that.
Yeah.
The thing that's interesting about that is recanting that is the fact that after all was said and done, and your uncle, your grandfather, had been contacted in England and refused to take the case because he had his own vision of what was guilty and who wasn't, is they represented the maid Bridget,
Yes.
who was an Irish immigrant, who they probably thought, I can't speak for them, they probably thought that this could be a stacked deck against somebody
Absolutely.
like reaching out to the farmers who were immigrants and so on and so forth. They could be, dragged into that just to get some acquittal of the grant, and to put an end to the Lizzie Borden type of thing. Let me go back to the young girl that was hung. Let me read one passage in here that this was verses that were written in honor of Sarah Marshall Cornell. I think they're lasting. Where shall thy mirror appear? My God, thy judgments are most deep. No verdict can the monster clear. Who dies a hypocrite must wake to weep. And there's some great passages in here that you have about that young lady.
Yep.
Yeah, there was a great deal of sentiment published about her,
I'll bet.
both in poetry and in articles, and
Yeah.
she became
Well-
someone that people knew locally because
Yeah.
of the story.
Well, even,
Unlike Lizzie Borden, who became a worldwide sensation because of the story.
but in the case of Lizzie Borden, I don't think people really embraced non-guilt.
Oh, they did it during her trial. They did, absolutely.
They believed that by and large, no matter what.
Not while she was on trial.
No, nobody.
She had supporters in that courtroom every day. She had the Reverend Buck and the Reverend Jubb supported her. She was walked into the court with a reverend every day. She had women's groups. She had temperance groups. She had they descended upon Fall River and lent their support to her in the courtroom. Nobody believed she did it. They defended her, but when it was over, she was tainted because she had been accused. Not because they thought she was guilty, but because she had gone through this. She wasn't for proper acceptance into the society after that. because she was on trial for murder.
Yeah.
Whether she did
For
it
her
or
life,
not.
for her life.
Yeah.
For her life, yeah.
But whether she did it or not. And then
Yeah.
the rumors started and that kind of thing, and then people started
Well,
making
everybody.
up things
Now,
about her.
let me say for the audience, the viewing audience, you guys co-authored the book. You have been so much involved with the Lizzie Borden case.
Oddly, yes.
You know, I mean, which brought you together, which then brings up the issue of who represents Lizzie Borden. That comes up more than in the house, talking at breakfast table or dinner table. And so you have all those things that intricately involved in one another. The fact is that it makes the book very, very interesting.
Well,
It makes both of you very, very popular.
the chapter on Lizzie
I'm telling you.
was one where I didn't want to retell the tale because we only know basic facts.
Yeah, I know.
For sure. The rest of it has been sort of corrupted and changed and mythologized
Yep.
through the years. And it's interesting because when I read everything about Lizzie, and so many books are factually inaccurate,
Yep.
that then you begin to doubt all history, all historical
Yep.
accounts of anything. Because if everybody could get this story wrong on basic factual information, then imagine every other case that people write about. It's difficult.
Stephanie, the media changes everything if they think there's an opening to be first.
But it isn't even that. It's just they don't do their homework, some people.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Some people, they don't do their
That's a
homework.
sarcastic answer.
Yeah.
Really?
But yes, there is bias in everything.
There is.
Absolutely.
I mean, the question is, it becomes a story that they could use and use and use.
Well,
and use.
you find it especially with the Lizzie case, where you can tell that the author has an idea whether she's guilty or not when they start to write the book,
Of course.
and then they only select things that reinforce their belief system and leave out all the other things that
Yeah.
could say she's innocent. So you get a very, and yet it's called nonfiction, even though it's a one perspective focus on guilt.
Let me just
Go ahead.
interject for a second. There's a book written by our fellow schoolmate, Joseph Conforti. I don't know if you remember,
remember.
Joe Conforti, but Joe Conforti went to Sacred Heart School,
Right.
and he wrote a book called Lizzie Borden on Trial, Murder, Ethnicity, and Gender. And he picks out the Protestant community in Fall River against the Catholic community, or the Irish Catholics, which were predominantly the police department. So it was the police department that wanted to find her guilty because she was a Protestant, and
I got it. Oh, he wrote that in the book?
well,
It's
that was
well received, yeah.
that was the theme of his book, rather than just about the trial. He picked out the differences between the community. It's a wonderful read.
Yeah.
Oh, the whole thing is a wonderful. You know, the one part here, I'm not skipping over. You have so much good things in here. I want to keep skip over. I want to go to the Pinky Hathaway deal.
Oh yeah, see that was
And
another.
and the reason the Pinky Hathaway deal rings a bell with me is that my mother was a nurse. Okay.
Oh, at Truesdale?
Well, she was at Union Hospital.
Union Hospital.
My sister, my two sisters have passed away. They were both nurses, mother, sister. That was something that my mother talked about, which I had no idea, being so young.
Yeah,
I'm
you were a
88.
kid, Tom.
A
You
kid.
were you even born then?
Well, let me put it. I don't know if I was born there. Like maybe it could have happened, and I could have been born late. I don't know, but I was enough to remember the name, Pinky Hathaway.
Yeah, okay, but he
Well,
was.
Who killing a nurse.
Who could forget the name Pinky Hathaway?
Pinky Hathaway. And then they describe Pinky Hathaway. And then he tells his friend, calls his friend up to tell him that he thinks she's choking on a drink that she had. And he didn't hit her. And the whole thing is so bizarre.
It is bizarre.
Yeah, yeah. And so
And then you have the controversy with whether it happened in Tiverton, Rhode Island, or whether it happened in
because
Massachusetts.
of the death sentence.
the death penalty.
Yes.
But the body was found in Rhode Island, and they couldn't prove that it happened anywhere else. So
All right.
it was tried in Rhode Island.
But that was, he got out and he left.
Well, he was convicted,
Yeah.
and then he went to jail, and then he got out, and then he lived in Tennessee.
No, I think it was
Texas?
Alabama or Georgia. one of
And then
those
he came
places.
back to Fall River to take care of his brother,
A mother,
Alden.
brother, or whatever. That's what the
And he
story-
lived on June Street. Used to hang out at the YMCA.
Oh, he used to live near there, right?
Yeah,
he lived
right
near
behind it.
right behind it. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, but see, that is a lot of things. You're too young for this stuff.
Yeah,
There's a lot of things that
Tom and I can
we can recall names that hung out there.
Well, his father was a state rep,
Yeah, I saw that.
so he was. They had. He was somebody.
Well, it didn't do him a lot of good, did it?
No, it didn't do him any good at all. Well,
Matter of
that's
fact,
because-
that's like the kids at that. Pardon me for saying that.
That's because he was tried in Rhode Island, though,
Yeah,
too, and the
yeah.
state rep was the father was state rep in
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
He did take off afterwards and went to Boston, visited his uncle, who got rid of the car, and he had aided and abetted by family during that.
I noticed in a couple of instances, I can't think of the name that stuck out with me, but they committed murder, axe murders, what have you, who were Portuguese immigrants.
Yeah, one was on the Bertha Manchester
There you go.
case,
Yeah.
and it was right at the time, Stephanie pointed out last night when we were speaking in the Somerset Library, that it was right at the time that the jury was in session.
Sequestered for the Lizzie
Yeah.
Borden trial.
That Bertha Hathaway was killed up on New Boston Road as you made the swing going back to they had a farm up there.
The Manchester farm.
And,
Meridian Street.
And, well,
Oh,
it's now
The end of
Meridian.
Meridian, yeah.
Right. And she found this, she had this immigrant farm worker on the farm, and he was robbing the house when she
Found him.
found him, and then he killed him.
With an axe.
But the thing about it is, found guilty, sentenced, and then released and could not come back, had to go
He
back.
was
to,
deported, yeah.
yeah, he had to go back to Portugal.
He
and
still
couldn't
claimed
come
his
back.
innocence, though. He never admitted to any of it.
Yeah,
He was turned in by his uncles.
yeah. That's,
The family. They said, no, he did it. He did it.
Because he had the money, right? He was
Right.
trying
yeah,
to
but,
buy
they
some
weren't
shoes.
trying to find the dough. Yeah,
He
bought
had-
some
it was a
shoes and he had a
special-
pocketbook.
It was a special dollar that had a hole cut out in the middle of it.
Yeah,
And
they gave.
it was
But
that
it was
belonged
the
to-
pocketbook that he took
Yeah,
the
the
money out
pocketbook.
of
In a
Yeah.
shoe
to
store.
the vendor, and the vendor then said he remembered the pocketbook,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
no witness. But then many of these well, that's found guilty, but many of the stories in the book, plus there are a lot more, is that they have there's nobody been found guilty of a lot of these crimes.
No, they weren't found guilty. A lot of them weren't found guilty. I would
Yeah.
say, weren't found guilty. They
Yeah.
they were let go, or they were
Committed,
found guilty, and then a governor
commuted.
commuted them.
Pardon
And it's like, what are you going to do to stay in prison?
Well, there was the gentleman who killed who was 19 years old, and he went to he was on a ship, and he was in New Bedford, and
Yeah.
he dated a 40-year-old waitress,
Yeah.
and she lived in Fairhaven, and they went back to her place, and he killed her there, and he was tried and acquitted of her murder, and then he goes back to Kentucky, and he kills again. Kills a young woman.
Yep.
Most odd circumstances, and his story was so weird. He killed a 19-year-old girl who just graduated from high school, and he was convicted of that crime in Kentucky. And then he was sent to a prison work farm. We had those in the South.
Yep.
I'm from
Yep.
the South. But it was managed and run by respectable or trustworthy prisoners.
Yeah.
So there were a lot
Well,
of
they
escapes.
were very profitable
A
in the
lot of
South for
escapes.
businesses.
Yeah.
They used
In fact, there were like
lumber.
19 escapes in the first 4 months of the year, in the year that he escaped. And he
Brubeck, wasn't that the movie Brubeck? It was the movie that was
Brubaker.
Brubaker,
Yeah,
Robert Redford.
yeah.
He exposes that whole
Yep.
thing with the thing.
Yeah, the work farms.
Yeah.
So this guy escapes with a couple of other people. They track him down. One guy's shot and killed. He's injured. He gets sent back to the work farm, and then he is acquitted. He is pardoned by the governor. And he's 39 years old. He's killed 2 people, and he's let loose on society. And the
Not
mother,
the same person that they found not guilty, you get out and kill somebody soon
yes,
after. That's
yes.
the same
And the
person.
mother of the second victim was not notified that he was being released. And she called the governor and said, "What are you doing? And why didn't you tell me? And why didn't you ask me what I thought? I would have said something." And he said, "Well, we couldn't track you down. We didn't know where you were." And he said, but I feel sorry. I understand and I feel bad for you. She goes, "No, you don't." She says, "Until you've had your daughter strangled by somebody, you do not
That's right.
know what this is all about." And
It's
she told
also-
it like it was.
There's also a sailor, a Swedish sailor that was run over
In Somerset.
in
Yeah.
Somerset.
Yeah.
You know, as we are in Somerset,
Yep.
telling
Yes,
the story.
yes,
You know
Yep.
what I mean? So he was. What happened there?
Well, the fellow who wrote, his name was Haskin Olsen, and he was 21 years old, and he was a merchant marine and was hit and killed in Somerset by a drunk driver, Alfred Roderick, who was 27. And Roderick tried to hide his car, and it was ended up found in a shop. And
I see.
that's how they tracked down.
I don't mean to
Roderick.
skip over with everything
No,
here
no,
because
no.
there's so much to remember. What about Purcell? Purcell rings a bell. Did he own the theater that was on Purchase Street?
Oh, was it the Embassy? The corner of Purchase and what the one that came down?
Rock or not Rock?
No. I don't know if he owned it, but he was walking back that way to his house and was hit over the head in a robbery attempt and ended up being killed.
I think I went to school with the boy who was found guilty.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the name got to be familiar. Now, why it got to be familiar? Not really. It was a Portuguese last name, so there's many people with Portuguese last name. I'm not trying to, but I remember Purcell. That name Purcell. I thought he owned the Embassy Theater, or was running the Embassy Theater. That's where he had money from, and that's what they were.
That may be, Tom. I didn't get that part of it. That there's a picture of him in here, but
that's the victim.
Yeah, that's Purcell.
Yeah. Purcell.
He was robbed while walking home, as I said, by Frank Amaral and Edmund Mello.
Yeah.
They were 19 and 25.
Where he was killed or hit is so close to the Embassy Theater.
Said he was walking home from his job as manager of the liquor store. That's what the newspaper accounts would have said. Now, maybe he also worked in the Embassy Theater, sort of as a ticket taker or
Or
something
maybe he
like
was
that.
another relative, a different name. But I just the Embassy Theater just rang a bell.
I was really interested in making sure that we had addresses for a lot of these places, and so I was painstakingly trying to find out where these murders took place, like exactly where. And so there are addresses for these places. So you know, if you're of a mind to go visit murder sites, because I know that that's actually very popular for people to drive around on a Sunday and go visit murder sites.
No, right.
The addresses are in here as well.
As you amply put, you said that in the book, you said in your book, you said that this isn't just to give you these gory details of murder.
No.
It was to not to be forgotten the people who have been murdered,
Right.
and those that and the costs that pursued the murder.
And their families. I mean,
Their family, and the law enforcement for what they have to do every single day.
Yeah, it's dedicated to law enforcement. And,
Yeah.
We know it's been a tough year for law enforcement in this country, and so I thought it was appropriate to
Go ahead.
to dedicate this book to law enforcement. Which last night at the speaking we had a former four of a policeman. And we had a former chief of police of Somerset there, so I'm happy that they're.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is the right thing. You don't know. I mean, as I try to relate it to you guys, that I happen to be a prison guard, would you believe, when Albert DeSalvo escaped from Bridgewater, and the real funny part about it was there was a manhunt for Albert DeSalvo. Now, I was a garment. That's right. I worked in the garment trade. I was a shirt designer and what have you. And then I went into the correction department and was teaching that in the school. And then I love going out with a big, muscular guard who says to me, "Hey, wait a minute. We're going to look for DeSalvo. He's got a gun." He says, "I'm with a tailor."
What's the tailor going to do?
What the hell is the tailor going to do? You going to measure him for pants? I mean, what are we going to do?
You were going to sew up the case.
Where was he found?
He was found trying to escape. He was in Boston. He had a sailor's outfit on. Yeah, he got to Boston, and he had a sailor's outfit. They caught the drug addict at a drugstore out. The murderer, they got him also. And then DeSalvo was still loose, and they had everybody on that case. And he was trying to get aboard a tanker to Germany.
Wow.
His wife was a German.
Yes.
So she had family in Germany, and he was trying to get there, and that's when they grabbed him.
Wow. Fascinating.
It's an interesting story. Well, anyway, I'm going to tell you something. Let me just take over here, if you don't mind. First of all, number one, you've got to buy this book. You've got to read this book. Not only Stephanie and John have put a lot into it, but it's so intriguing, so interesting. I'll bet that if you read this book, you will remember in some case, maybe not all of them, because of the time, but you'll remember some of them, and your parents or your grandparents have told you about some of them. The book, it really is to not to forget those who have been killed in some form, but also is to boost up morale with the law enforcement people who have a tough job to do this. So if you get a chance, don't forget to buy this. And by the way, this could be the first of a couple of volumes of this. So let me thank John and Stephanie for coming on board.
Thank you,
The Breakfast
Senator.
Club.
Thank you.
Always nice
Nice
to
to
see
meet
you.
you, sir.
It's a pleasure, always.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.